Hello everyone, this is part 23 of What If Naruto Was Abused and Leaves Konoha, and I hope you guys enjoy this video and to like, to subscribe, and check out the playlist, to see more comment down below. Now let's start the intro.
They call me a god. They call me a god. They call me a god.
Fu and Tayuya both reached the scene just as the Sanbi crashed back down into the waters, taking Gurren and Naruto with it. They rushed toward where the waters still churned, but it looked like the Three Tails was done for now, not bothering to resurface. Tayuya managed to spot the single Naruto clone holding onto a struggling Yukimaru, the flaming blue light just fading as the Sanbi retreated below the ocean's surface. She rushed over and arrived just in time to see the single clone burst out of existence. She caught Yukimaru in her arms before he could drop into the water and looked around. The ocean had calmed again, leaving no sign that an enormous turtle-like creature had been there at all. She spotted Gozu still struggling with the remaining lightning coursing through his system, but Gurren and Naruto were nowhere in sight. Tayuya felt a tug at her heart and a small tear threatened to break from her eyes, but she sniffed it back. Naruto had given him a mission and she had to protect the now passed out boy in her arms. She knew he would be alright, it was Naruto after all, he was always alright. Unfortunately, those thoughts didn't keep her eyes from watering. She turned, seeing Fu looking almost as lost as she did. She needed to be strong right now. Come on Fu, we need to round up those guys and make sure they can't escape while we wait for Naruto. Fu just stared at her, unsure of what to say. Tayuya knelt down on the waters, bringing her eyes to Fu's level. Come on Fu, Naruto would want you to be strong right now. He's going to be fine, believe it. Fu smiled weakly at the redhead's words as they turned their attention back to their former opponent, their main concern being the slowly recovering Gozu. Naruto awoke to the slow drip of water against his forehead. For a second he thought that his mindscape had somehow reverted back to a sewer and he was there. He thought against it, he couldn't feel that familiar tug that showed him the direction of the Kyuubi. He cracked open an eye and looked around his new environment, shocked when he appeared to be in the heart of some elaborate and strange cave system. Wearily he got to his feet and looked around some more, but in every direction it just seemed to be the same strange rock formation with tunnels branching off in a few directions. Hey Kurama, where the hell are we? He waited a few seconds as he could feel Kyuubi's discomfort over the question. I don't think you'll like my answer, Kit. Naruto frowned at the answer, trying to think back to what he could remember before he got here. He was fighting Gurren and Gozu, trying to penetrate her crystal armor when the waters started getting choppy. Then the Three Tails appeared out of nowhere before rocketing on him with its mouth open. Oh, that's sick. It freaking ate me. Naruto shuddered at the prospect of being eaten by a tailed beast before looking around again. It certainly didn't look like what he imagined a stomach to look like, and he had been in one before thanks to that damn snake summon. He had to admit this was a marked improvement on red slimy walls though. He walked over and patted one of the walls. Huh. Rock hard. It gives a whole new meaning to an iron gut. He saw a few puddles around the floor and thought it best to probably avoid those if possible, probably some kind of acid that would dissolve him alive. Again the idea made him shudder while really wishing he was out of here now. Hey Kurama, you know a way out of here? The ancient fox seemed to stare at him incredulously from inside his own mind. And what makes you think I've been here before? Naruto just chuckled sheepishly before moving along the strange cave-like place, looking for an exit. He would prefer not to have to leave the natural way if that was at all possible. He wandered aimlessly for a while, taking any random turn he could. He knew Yukimaru was at least with Tayuya thanks to his clone's last memories, and it was also Yukimaru who had summoned Isabu. It would appear that his ability was closely linked with his emotions, which could prove dangerous in the future. More so if he actually was made into a Jinchuriki. He seemed to have a strong emotional tie to Gurren. If he found out she was dead, then he might do something drastic. Of course Naruto didn't know if Gurren was dead or not, but his clone hadn't seen her after the Three Tails had eaten him, so he assumed she was somewhere in here with him. He pondered the question as he walked, wondering why Yukimaru would care so much for a subordinate of Orochimaru. Was it an act? A ruse to get him to trust them? Naruto wouldn't put it past the snake, but what he had seen when Yukimaru collapsed was genuine concern. It confused him greatly. He turned into a large cavern-like area of the Sanbi, again wondering how this place was so expansive when the actual creature wasn't nearly this big. He took a moment and stopped, trying to think if he had been here before, except all the passages and room-like structures just looked the same. He could be walking in circles for all he knew. Surprisingly, he spotted movement and Gurren walked out of a different passage, right into the room he was in. You. She pointed a warning finger at him before keeling over, clutching her side in pain. She collapsed to the floor, apparently unconscious, and Naruto rushed over. She might have been an enemy, but he had seen some redeemable traits from her and wouldn't let her die like this. He looked around again. Hell, nobody deserves to die in a place like this, except maybe Orochimaru. When he reached her, he checked her side. The once white flower pattern on her kimono was now stained red with her own blood. He examined the wound, seeing that the problem was a shard of her own crystal armor had shattered and left a large gash across her side. He cursed to himself. Tayuya was the one with medical ninjutsu. He knew nothing of it, just the basic first aid taught at the academy. He pulled out a medical kit he always kept in a seal on his thigh and started wiping the wound clean with antiseptic. Even in her unconscious state, Gurren still winced from the painful substance rubbing against her open wound. He cleaned her up and bandaged the gash as best he could. Knowing nothing of how a normal body heals due to his own rapid healing factor, he could only guess at how fast the woman could recover. Perhaps in a few days or maybe a week, probably sooner if she received proper medical attention, not his /dab job at it. She seemed to be really out of it, but he had bandaged her wound to the best of his ability, so there was nothing more he could do. He waited around for a little while but quickly grew bored with that. He still needed to find a way out of here, but at the same time he couldn't leave Gurren alone in this condition. He still didn't know how the Sanbi digested its food, and he really didn't want to find out. He picked up Gurren as gently as he could, carrying her bridal style so he didn't upset her wound even more. He began to wander again, looking for any sign of a way out, except he could find nothing. It was frustrating. No matter where he went, it was exactly the same. There were no discernible features that told him he was heading in the right direction, or even the wrong direction. It even smelled the same everywhere he went, and all he could hear was the occasional drip of water and some weird clattering that had been there since he woke up here. He didn't pay it much mind. It was all around him and didn't help him escape, so he just continued to wander aimlessly. After a while he felt Gurren shift in his arms and groan as she woke up, blinking in the weak light that somehow bathed the area. She first looked around through blurry eyes, noting she was still in the Sanbi's stomach before noticing that she was bobbing slightly. She looked up only to see the face of the blonde shinobi that had taken Yukimaru from her. Her eyes opened wide before narrowing into slits, a snarl replacing her peaceful smile. You. What are you doing? Put me down. She struggled in Naruto's grasp, but the more she struggled, the more she felt her injury give her pain. Naruto eventually walked over to where a rock-like structure jutted up from the ground and placed the struggling kunoichi on it. He moved back from her, looking her over impassively. She looked different to most of Orochimaru's lackeys, a lot like Anko in fact. For a brief moment that gave him a glimmer of hope that she too could break away from him, but he quashed it before he gained false hope. You. She trailed off with a frown, touching a hand to her wound and noticing the bandages wrapped around her torso. You wrapped my wound. Why? Her voice held a lot of hostility and suspicion out. Naruto ignored it as best he could. I don't leave people to die when they can't defend themselves, not when they've done nothing to me. I'm not like Orochimaru. Gurren just stared back at him defiantly, desperately trying to ignore the pain in her side. Don't talk about Orochimaru-sama that way. Naruto stared right back, anger encroaching into his eyes. Why not? All he has ever done is brought pain and misery. He tried to hurt Tayuya. He killed the old man. He tried to hurt Tsunade. Why do you even serve him? Gurren kept up her defiant glare, although the pain was really starting to get to her, making her lightheaded and dizzy. You wouldn't understand. Lord Orochimaru saved me from a village that despised me because of what I could do. What would you know about that? Naruto's anger left him all at once, and when he looked at Gurren staring defiantly back at him, he only saw himself. He saw a young Gaara shunned by his village, a young Fu looking up to him because he had saved her from a life of loneliness and fear. He didn't know quite what to say to her. She was a reflection of himself, or what he might have been. I understand. His voice was quiet, a whisper. I understand better than you know. Gurren only got angrier. No you don't, nobody understands. Kabuto told me about you. You're from the sand, aren't you? They already have 2 Jinchuriki. Who are you to judge Lord Orochimaru for wanting the same thing? You just want Yukimaru for yourself so the sand can use him as a weapon. Naruto felt a little bit of the anger return to him as he stared down at her. I don't understand. You don't understand. Yeah, the sand has Jinchuriki and you're looking at one of them. I understand what it's like to be hated by people because of something you had no control over, something that makes them fear and despise you because they don't understand it even though they wanted you to be that way. That's why I went to Suna, to get away from all that, so I didn't have to live with those people who hated me. You think I want to put Yukimaru through all that? Then you're as delusional as your asshole of a leader. Gurren faltered slightly in her gaze. Why, you're a Jinchuriki. Naruto nodded grimly. Yup. You're looking at the container for the nine-tailed fox. Gurren just stared at him some more, his headband now made a lot more sense, as did the little girl's. And that girl. He nodded again, his eyes downcast. Yeah. Fu is as well. I saved her from her village, they hated her and treated her like trash, so I rescued her, brought her with me so she wouldn't have to grow up alone, with nobody to care about her. It also meant she wouldn't fall into the hands of people like Orochimaru. Gurren flinched slightly at the anger in his voice, she could tell he cared a lot for the girl, much like she cared for Yukimaru. Why are you telling me all this? Naruto looked down at his feet, remembering Anko and the passion with which she despised Orochimaru. Because I believe there is still good in you, good that's wasted on a scumbag like Orochimaru. He might have saved you from your village, but I bet after that he forced you into all kinds of situations you hated, situations that forced you to ignore your humanity to blindly follow him. If you're worried about him hurting you, then don't worry, because when I get rid of the akatsuki and make sure that those closest to me are safe, he's next. Gurren stared at him for a moment before she broke out in laughter, forcing her to clamp a hand over her injury as it burned from the exertion. You really think you can defeat Lord Orochimaru, and you call me delusional? I could die laughing. She grimaced as the pain reared up again, literally. Naruto just scowled. He might not be ready to face Orochimaru yet, but once he dealt with Akatsuki he would have the experience he needed to finally end the snake. You'd be surprised by what I can do. Gurren stopped laughing, narrowing her eyes at the comment. Kabuto had once told her this kid was dangerous, she couldn't really see it herself. Sure, he had a few powerful lightning techniques, but that wasn't really much. Then again, they had only fought for a few minutes, he was unlikely to have revealed everything in that time, she certainly didn't. Then if you aren't after Yukimaru, why are you here? Naruto looked around, he thought that the clattering he had heard was getting louder, but he might have been imagining things. I need information. Orochimaru put a curse seal on Tayuya. I need to find Sasuke Uchiha and take a look at his mark so that I can get rid of the one on her. Gurren continued to just stare at him incredulously. First Orochimaru and now the Uchiha, are you crazy? I've seen what that kid can do, you're outclassed. There's no point in trying to find him anyway, Lord Orochimaru is never far from his side. Naruto just chuckled to himself lightly. Yeah, you'd be surprised at how many times I've been outclassed in a fight. Some might have said Sasori of the Red Sand or Deodara of Iwa should have been too much for me. Gurren gasped, she had heard those names before. They were members of the organization Orochimaru used to belong to, and supposedly he wasn't even the most powerful of them. Still, she didn't believe that this kid had managed to defeat two S-ranked missing nin, there was no way. You're lying. Naruto just sighed and drew something out of his pocket, showing her the two rings in his hand as his ears continued to twitch. Gurren gasped again, he recognized the rings as the same type that Orochimaru wore on his one hand. She looked up at Naruto again, trying to puzzle out what it was he was hiding that made him so powerful, apart from the Kyuubi of course. According to Kabuto though, he had minimal control over the fox, letting his anger get the best of him. So what? This doesn't. Shush. Naruto held up a hand to halt her, earning him an irritated look as he pressed his ear to the floor of the cavern. Do you hear that? Gurren looked around but couldn't hear anything except for the gentle drip of water. As she listened closer though, she could faintly make out the sounds of clacking, like when a crab opens and closes its claw. What is that? Naruto just shrugged before spotting something behind Gurren. It looked like a full miniature version of Isabu and it looked hungry. Naruto reacted on a sixth sense, spinning on a heel and grabbing another of the creatures before it could bite him. He looked it in the face, noting its angry and hungry expression before throwing it across the room, only to see hundreds more surrounding the pair. Shit. Run for it. They both took off, jumping over large groups of the miniature sandbeasts to avoid getting swarmed. They stuck to the walls, ceiling, anything that the little tenacious turtles weren't already crawling on as they ran in any random direction. Naruto saw Gurren trip over the swarm right behind them, and didn't hesitate when he bent down and scooped her up into his arms. Hey, put me down. I'll just get rid of them with my crystal release. Naruto just looked down at her sternly, using a hand to block hers before it could form into a sign. You'll only hurt yourself in your condition. We can outrun them. Naruto picked up the pace, leaving the majority of the swarm behind him as he took off, surprising Gurren with his speed. Gurren continued to struggle lightly but was prevented from doing much thanks to her injury. Put me down, I still have some pride, you know. Naruto just huffed to himself as he continued to run. Says the person working for Orochimaru. He looked at her defiantly, daring her to disagree with him. She narrowed her eyes in irritation but said nothing, crossing her arms under her chest instead. Naruto saw an alcove and made sure that they weren't being followed anymore before ducking in, hidden for now. He gently placed Gurren back down where she immediately clutched the wound at her side. If she didn't get out of her soon, it was only going to get worse. Why? She looked up at him, her eyes boring a hole through him. I still don't understand why you're doing this. Naruto looked at her, sighing before he dropped down onto the floor with her. I already told you, I'm not going to let anybody, Yukimaru included, have to go through what I went through. Nobody deserves that. Gurren looked to the ground, clutching her wound tighter. I wouldn't let that happen. Naruto narrowed his eyes before sighing again, leaning his head back to stare at the ceiling. It's not something you can have control over. He would still be hated, loathed, feared, whether you want other people to feel that way or not. It's up to other people to befriend him, to look past the demon he would contain. You can't make them like him. He chuckled at the irony, talking about containing a demon he himself was stuck inside of. One person would never be enough, you may think so, but what about when you're gone? What about when there's nobody left for him and he's all alone? We're shinobi, our lifespan isn't great. Sooner or later you'll die and he'll be alone again, ripe for Orochimaru to manipulate into being a weapon. Gurren clutched her hand tighter around her wound, causing more pain than relief. You don't understand, I have to help him. I took away the one place where he belonged, the one place where he could have had the life you described. I just want to give it back to him, to help him. Naruto looked down at her, sighing for the last time before a small smile spread across his features. Great. Gurren looked up at him, a few tears streaking down her face as she remembered her pain, the past that would always haunt her. What? Naruto kept his smile but didn't break his gaze away from the ceiling. I said great. Do that then. Help him, just don't let Orochimaru get his claws into him like he did you. Gurren looked at him, still crying, like he was insane. Run away, hide, find a place where he can be safe and live a normal life, I don't care as long as he's okay. Gurren stopped crying, looking up at the blonde, blinking away the tears as best she could. But first, he looked around the cavern, his eyes narrowing as he examined every feature clearly. That means I have to get you out of here. He took a deep breath before standing up, offering his hand to Gurren, who took it shakily. He moved her back, a little closer to the entrance to the alcove before he made a one-handed seal and 100 or so shadow clones popped into existence. Gurren stared at the massive amounts of clones with wide eyes before all of them clutched their wrists tightly. 100 bright balls of swirling energy formed in the room, and with a large battle cry that was uncommon for Naruto, they all charged at one wall. The many Raisingans crashed into the wall, stopped momentarily, but after a moment the clones just pushed harder and the rocky wall crumbled away under the combined assault. They started burrowing through, picking up pace with momentum as they broke through the wall into another cavern. The clones just charged straight through, repeating the process on another wall which also caved in short time. Naruto repeated this cycle for as long as he had to, smashing through wall after wall, still chased by the swarm of mini Isabu. When a clone ran out of energy he created two more, when their Raisingans wore out they created even bigger ones. Each time they smashed through a wall only to face another, the clones would just grit their teeth in determination and continued running. Gurren looked behind her, being carried by the original Naruto, at the path of destruction they had caused. Finally a clone managed to break through a wall, only for a trickle of water to emerge from the hole he created. The other clones took this as a sign that they were getting closer and redoubled their efforts, pouring all the energies in their temporary bodies into their attack until an enormous hole was created, gushing water into the Sanbi. Wait, what are you? Gurren didn't get a chance to finish her statement before the water engulfed them completely. Both felt as though their bodies were being pulled in every direction at once before a sinking feeling overcame them and the two passed out. Tayuya looked over in satisfaction at the tied-up sound shinobi, although they had to take extra precautions with Gozu and Nurari considering how they could manipulate their bodies. Luckily, thanks to constant advice from Naruto, Fu carried around a large amount of chakra-suppressing rope in a storage scroll. It was practically standard issue for most Anbu considering the dangerous people they are sent after, but she and Naruto had found a lot of use for it during the training trip. Tayuya was marveling at it when Gozu and Nurari woke up, completely unable to move or use their chakra in any way. The beauty of the rope was the intricate sealing array adorning the length of the thick cord. It absorbed the captive's chakra and actually used it to strengthen itself. It could be overloaded, but that would require close to Kage or Biju levels of chakra, something they didn't have to worry about with these prisoners. Unfortunately for them, as soon as they realized they were captured, they refused to even talk to them. Well, refused until Tayuya started threatening to cut off a certain male anatomical feature they would rather not lose, then they were all for talking. They didn't have much to offer though, all their orders came down through Gurren, only Gozu had ever even seen Orochimaru, and that was only on an operating table. All they knew was the locations of the few bases they were allowed to enter, none of which Orochimaru frequented often. Tayuya sighed to herself as she walked away from the prisoners. All the information was with Gurren, who was currently with Naruto in the stomach of the Sanbi. She looked longingly toward the ocean, just hoping for a sign that her boyfriend was all right. She sighed again, looking down at the ground as she walked back to the small camp she and Fu had set up after they tied up the Sound Nin. Yukimaru was still unconscious from overexerting his ability, and Fu was fussing over him, bringing a small smile to Tayuya's lips. So, any change? Fu just looked up at Tayuya in mock annoyance before looking back at Yukimaru with concern. You tell me, you're the one with the medic skills. Tayuya just shrugged and waved a green glowing hand over Yukimaru's torso, diagnosing what she could. He's just exhausted, he'll probably wake up in, said boy's eyes flickered open at that point, looking up at the two teenagers staring down at him, a few seconds apparently. She cursed. Her diagnosis made it at least another half hour, and that made her wonder if her medic skills were getting rusty. Well, it wasn't like she had a teacher or anything, it was mostly experimentation on herself. Really, she could only heal herself. It was much easier than trying to force your chakra into somebody else's body. The problem with medical ninjutsu is the fact that a body will always reject foreign chakra unless it is given time to build up in the system. That was also why a Jinchuriki has to be a child when the beast is sealed within them, or their chakra system will become too developed and reject the foreign chakra of the Biju. That's why it was a taxing process to heal somebody. You had to be constantly forcing your own chakra into their body, even as it was rejecting it despite being used to heal them. Yukimaru gazed around, looking at the two girls, not fully comprehending what was going on until he remembered everything that had happened. His eyes shot open wide and his body snapped up as his hand immediately found its way into his tunic, rooting around until his whole body visibly relaxed and he withdrew the crystallized camellia. Fu looked at him strangely, wondering why his focus was so intent on the flower. It's okay, Gurren's okay. He seemed to be talking to himself more than anything, but Tayuya caught his half-mumbled words. What? How do you know she's okay? Yukimaru just smiled and held up the crystal in both hands. If she was dead, then this crystal would have shattered. It's okay. Quote. He frowned as he looked at it more carefully. But it has a chip. Tayuya figured that probably meant the woman was injured or something, but didn't really care. If this kid was right and Gurren had survived being eaten, then that meant Naruto could have too. The small spark of hope in her chest lit up like a bonfire, causing her to stare wistfully out into the ocean again. At that point, Yukimaru seemed to notice that he wasn't around people he knew anymore. Hey, what's going on? Where are Gozu and Nurari and the rest? Tayuya just absently pointed a thumb back to where they were tied up. Over there, we had to tie them up in case they ran. Yukimaru looked at her fearfully, wondering if she was going to tie him up as well. As if reading his thoughts, Fu placed a comforting hand on his shoulder, which made him look around to her, only to find her face startlingly close to his own. He looked away with a blush at the ground but was still a little frightened by what was going to happen to him now. It's okay Yukimaru, when Naruto gets back we can take you somewhere safe. He looked up again, this time making sure his face would be further away from hers. But what about Gurren? I don't want to go anywhere without her. Fu frowned lightly but didn't say anything else. Supposedly the woman was alright but could she be trusted? Fu feared the answer and it would have to be up to Naruto whenever he got back. Come on Onisan, where are you already? Naruto woke up, more alert than he usually was after being knocked unconscious. He immediately picked himself up, noting that he was in some kind of rocky outlet on the coast. What the hell, how did I get here from the Sanbi's stomach? He tried to put that odd question out of his mind as he looked around, spotting Gurren lying limp over by some rocks. He quickly jogged over and checked to see if she was still breathing. When he felt a heartbeat and a breath against his hand he smiled before lightly shaking her shoulder, wondering if she would be this gentle if the roles were reversed. She blinked her eyes open, groaning when the bliss of unconsciousness was replaced by the dull throb of pain in her side. She seemed to want to go back to sleep until she recognized the lightly smiling face hovering over hers. Naruto. He just nodded before her body jolted upright, a panicked expression on her face. Yukimaru. Naruto shook his head quickly but looked in the direction where he thought they had fought the three tails. My friends should have him. Gurren looked at him with anger until he put up a placating hand to calm her back down. Don't worry, they won't have hurt him, remember Fu's there. He chuckled, remembering how he girl acted around the young boy. He felt a little excited at the prospect of being able to give somebody the big brother talk. Gurren just relaxed before wincing as her side acted up again. Are you okay to walk? Gurren nodded before attempting to get up herself, only to fall and be caught by Naruto. He just sighed and swung her around gently until she was in his arms again, bridal style. Gurren blushed a little at the compromising position but Naruto didn't even notice. His concentration was elsewhere as he sorted through his muddled senses trying to locate Fu's chakra signature. After a moment he found it and headed towards it at a fast, but gentle pace, intending on letting Fu and Taiuya know he was okay and Yukimaru know that Gurren was okay. They picked their way through the forest until Naruto caught the smell of a campfire, his features breaking into a grin as he unconsciously quickened his pace. They broke through the tree line to a very surprised group of faces, which instantly turned into smiles as the people rushed to their respective loved ones. Naruto and Gurren were suddenly swarmed by Taiuya, Fu, and Yukimaru as they made sure they were okay, at least until Taiuya noticed Gurren. Hey, what's she doing with you? As far as Taiuya was concerned Gurren was as much to blame as the other sound ninja that Naruto was eaten in the first place. It's alright Taiuya, we came to an arrangement, she and Yukimaru are going to travel with us for a while, at least until we can find them somewhere safe to live. Taiuya didn't seem particularly happy with this new arrangement but crossed her arms under her chest and gritted her teeth. She knew Naruto was stubborn when it came to things like this and if he could trust them then she supposed she could too. So Onisan, what was it like inside the Sanbi? Both Naruto and Gurren just shuddered involuntarily, trying to force the memories out of their minds for good. Surprisingly spacious. So what do we do with these guys? The five of them crowed around the trees that the other members of Team Gurren were tied to. Gozu and Nurari were still dazed and disoriented from what Naruto and Fu did to them but Kigiri, Kihu, and Rinji were all looking at them fearfully. I dunno, we can't let them go. They'll just go running back to Orochimaru and tell him what we've done here. The captives shook their head furiously, unable to speak because of the lengths of cloth acting as gags. You're right but we can't take them with us, they'll only weigh us down or try to escape. Again the captives shook their heads desperately, all except Gozu anyway. Gurren looked thoughtfully down at the group with a hand under her chin, staring at Gozu in particular. She walked over and crouched down in front of him so that they were eye to eye. Gozu, you once told me that you would walk to the ends of the earth for me, is that still true? The large man nodded solemnly, not the agreement of a desperate prisoner but the sincere promise of a loyal follower. Gurren stood back up with a small smile, looking over to Naruto with a small nod. This'll work, Gozu is loyal to me, not Orochimaru. He can carry them until we can get them to somewhere they can be locked away. Taiuya narrowed her eyes at the scene, still not particularly liking all of this. Understandably she still didn't trust Gurren, mostly because not even an hour ago she was trying to kill Naruto. Naruto just looked between her and Gozu, eyeing them both for any sign of deceit or treachery before nodding tiredly. Fine, it's probably our best option anyway. It's not like we're cold-hearted enough to just leave them here. Tayuya put a hand up to her chin with a contemplative expression. Well, now that you, Naruto looked over at her sternly. Tayuya, no, she huffed, putting her hands under her chest in annoyance. Sheesh, it was a joke. I swear you get eaten by the Sanbi and suddenly you have no sense of humor. Naruto smiled a little at the over-the-top display of annoyance before walking up behind her and wrapping his arms around her waist. She fought against it at first before smiling herself and melting back into his arms. A simultaneous cough from Gurren and Fu snapped them out of their little world. Yes, well, I think we should probably get going. The base you wanted is in the land of hot water, so that means we'll have to charter a boat from one of the port towns to the north after we drop off these guys in Kirigakure. Naruto reluctantly separated from Tayuya, waving Gurren off with a hand. Don't worry about that, I got it covered. Tayuya raised her eyebrow at the declaration but said nothing, content to try and capture Naruto's hands again to wrap around her waist where she felt they belonged. At this point Fu perked up, having been quiet alongside Yukimaru until now. What about the Sanbi? Are we just going to leave it? Again Naruto just waved away her concerns with a hand, also trying to return to his comfortable position with Tayuya. Nah, Kyuubi says after me and Gurren burst out of its gut it's probably going to go and recuperate, plus Orochimaru doesn't have anything to capture it with now that Yukimaru's with us. He sent a small smile in the boy's direction who returned it with a little grin. Fu just nodded hesitantly, uncomfortable with the idea of leaving a large angry turtle in a cove off of water country. Now come on, I have to gather my strength before I can do another great breakthrough, so we might as well get a start on getting to Kiri. The group nodded and set off after him after untying Gozu, who promptly picked up the still-bound members of his old team. It was a ragtag group at best, but few would be able to stand against them with 2 Jinchuriki, a crystal user, and Tayuya. 2 cloaked figures walked along the barren pathway, one seemingly a lot more excited than the other. Despite their organization impressing the importance of subtlety on its members, the 2 were more than noticeable. The first was relatively unremarkable save for the bright orange spiraling mask that only had one eye hole at the center of the spiral. The second figure on the other hand would have turned heads even in the depths of Orochimaru's organization. Apart from the fact that he had an enormous Venus flytrap sprouting around his head, people would have noticed that his body was split into 2 colors down the middle with a black and a white half. Come on Mr. Zetsu, I think we're almost there. Zetsu sighed for the umpteenth time that day. Generally there was only so much he could put up with his fool of a partner before he started to look a little too tasty. Now remind me again, which tailed beast are we after again? Zetsu sighed to himself, in a more than literal sense considering his slightly differing personalities. The Sanbi. Toby nodded vigorously and Zetsu could have sworn he could see the man's tongue sticking out underneath the mask as he concentrated. He held up his hand with all his fingers splayed before counting off each one. Ichibi, Nibi, and I'm Toby. He giggled maniacally to himself from behind his mask as they continued to trek down the path. My Mr. Zetsu, you're being awfully quiet today, are you pollinating or something? There was a moment of silence as the 2 figures paused on the road before Toby doubled over in laughter, tears streaming down from behind his mask. Both sides of Zetsu grumbled in annoyance before walking on, content to simply ignore their blathering partner for now. Or, did Toby upset Mr. Zetsu? Ooh look, that place sells dango. Toby can make it up to Mr. Zetsu. Sure enough, Toby pointed down the stretch of road to where a small restaurant sat at the top of a hill with a sign advertising the dango. Zetsu just shook his head as a negative. It wasn't like he even enjoyed the taste of normal food anyway, not enough raw meat for his liking. Toby wailed from under his mask, this time tears of sadness streaming out as they walked past the restaurant. Why is Mr. Zetsu so mean to Toby? I try to be a good boy. Zetsu continued to grumble as the few patrons of the restaurant turned their heads at the very odd sight passing by. When they had finally gone far enough that they weren't drawing curious and slightly frightened looks, Zetsu finally quietened down. Toby had adopted a saddened, hunched-over pose as he walked in an overdramatic display of how upset he was. Toby was looking forward to having dango with Mr. Zetsu, then he was sure to get into akatsuki. Zetsu really was nearing the end of his considerable tether, the idiot persona of his partner just too much sometimes. Obito, must you really play this fool of an idiot while we are alone? It drives me insane. There was another pause as both figures stopped on the road, looking at each other, one with irritation and the other, unreadable due to the mask. Toby isn't a fool, Toby is a good boy. The black half of Zetsu sighed again as they continued on down the road. Oh, leave him alone, I like it. He reminds me of Spiral. The black half would have sneered if he had a visible mouth to do so with. A little too much if you ask me. The white half just shrugged as Toby continued to skip merrily down the path, swinging his arms in an exaggerated manner. Oh, this is going to be fun. When Toby captures the Sanbi, then he's sure to get into the akatsuki, for definite this time. Both Zetsus glanced at him before returning their attention to the job at hand. Capturing the Sanbi without it having a Jinchuriki host wasn't exactly going to be an easy feat. Preferably the organization would have sent somebody like Kisame or Deodara considering their skills, but Kisame was still trying to track down the Nanabi and Deodara had dropped off the map along with Sasori ever since they went to get the Ichibi. You have got to be kidding me, there's no way we can water walk that far. We'll all run out of chakra and drown. Gurren was staring incredulously out at the open stretch of water that separated Water Country from the larger continent to the north and west. It must have been over 30 miles across at the thinnest gap, and Naruto just expected him to walk across. She wasn't a cage for Kami's sake. No, you'll go as far as you can, then me and some clones will carry you, Tayuya, and Yukimaru. Fu can fly and He looked uncertainly across at Gozu. Even if he did have the stamina to run across the large stretch of ocean, he didn't think he could carry somebody that heavy. Gurren just looked between them, chuckling to herself at Naruto's daunting expression. Oh, don't worry about Gozu. Out of all of us, I would actually expect him to be able to make it. I don't think I've ever even seen him get tired. Naruto looked the man over again, taking in his rather simple features before shrugging. Well, okay, but if he starts to lag behind, I'm definitely not carrying him. Gozu just nodded with his own small but determined smile as he looked out over the water, then at Gurren. Well, come on then, we might as well get going. The group all nodded before sprinting out over the waters, hoping they didn't get caught in a storm or something. Fu unfurled her wings, taking to the air as she simultaneously shocked both Gurren and Yukimaru. The former stared up at her with a raised brow, knowing that she was a Jinchuriki, while the latter stared up with wonder as he looked at the sunlight stream through her semi-transparent wings. After about an hour of running, Gurren was starting to visibly tire and slow down, as was Tayuya. As soon as he saw this, Naruto immediately stopped and swung the redhead onto his back, re-picking up the pace as he tried to outrun Fu's flight. A few minutes later, he created two clones that repeated the procedure with Gurren and Yukimaru. Once again, Gurren didn't exactly look like she was enjoying being carried, but she found it a preferable option to drowning out here. As the hours dragged on and Naruto just continued to run, Gurren could only stare at the clone carrying her in amazement. She didn't believe having stamina like this was even natural, or chakra levels this high even possible. To say she had underestimated Naruto would have been a definite understatement. Even Fu, a fellow Jinchuriki, had to come down from her flight every once in a while to rest on a clone's back, while Naruto was able to charge right on. Not only his stamina impressed her, but his chakra control. He was able to simultaneously water walk while creating and maintaining clones. Even when the water became choppy further out to sea, he managed to maintain his balance and keep a startling pace. Gurren thought she had seen the limits of his speed inside the Sanbi when they were escaping the mini Isabu, but now she realized she hadn't even scratched the surface of what Naruto Uzumaki was capable of. Suddenly all those bravado-esque claims of defeating the Akatsuki and Orochimaru didn't seem all that far-fetched. In all this time, Yukimaru had simply been staring at Fu, whether she was in the air or resting on one of the Naruto clones' backs. He too had marveled at Naruto's abilities, but not as much as he had Fu's flight. She looked impossibly graceful as she rode air currents, sometimes not even having to flap her insect-like wings to stay airborne as she expertly rode the skies. They shimmered lightly in the sun and far from unappealing. Their thin, glass-like appearance only intrigued the young boy even more. Every so often Fu would feel like she was being watched intently, only to turn around while flying or resting to see nothing out of the ordinary. Occasionally she would catch Yukimaru looking away from her as if he were purposefully avoiding her gaze, while all the while his cheeks were tinged a faint red. She thought nothing of it. She was far too busy enjoying the feel of wind rushing by her skin, splaying her unruly hair out behind her. Even so, she kept note of it in her mind to possibly ask her older brother about it later. It intrigued her slightly the way Yukimaru acted so differently from Naruto. The only real interaction with boys Fu had was with B-sensei and Naruto. Other than the only other boys she had met her age were the ones in Hoshigakure and Chojuro. The boys in the village hidden in the stars were all a little too aloof for her taste, even though that had improved slightly by the time she had left. Chojuro was exactly like Yukimaru, shy and timid, unless of course you put him in a battle situation, then he was breathtaking to watch. It made her curious as to how boys could be so different. One end of the spectrum you had Naruto and B, the epitome of confidence yet at the same time kind and humble. Then you had people like Chojuro, just as kind and sweet but lacking confidence in themselves. Of course there were also the bad ones out there, the cocky guys who were too full of themselves or just plain cruel. For some reason Fu couldn't figure out where Yukimaru seemed to fit in all of this. He seemed nice enough but she didn't get the feeling he was naturally shy like Chojuro, only around her. Maybe Tayuya would be a better person to ask seeing as she had found her way into Naruto's heart. Hey, I think I see land. She called out to the rest of the group from her position high above them and caught the thumbs up from Naruto to acknowledge they had heard. He powered on, actually increasing his already speedy pace so that he could reach land quicker. He hoped they arrived in the right place. He should have moved in a straight line, but sometimes with the waves he lost track. If they did go in the right direction, then they should end up at the southern coast of the land of hot water. After another 15 minutes, Naruto was finally able to set his feet on land again, allowing his stiff passengers to get off his back. Tayuya for one just dropped to the ground, rolling around on the floor, glad to be back on solid ground where there was no threat of drowning. Gurren and Yukimaru seemed just as pleased but were slightly less visible with their celebration. Naruto smiled at the warm scene before taking one step further inland and promptly fainting on the spot. Tayuya looked down at his crumpled form before stifling a laugh. Wow, looks like we found Naruto's limit. I thought I'd never see the day. Gurren just nodded dumbly. She had been unsure of Naruto's abilities right up until the end, and it seems that even 5 more minutes and they would have all been plunged into the freezing waters of the ocean. He's truly remarkable, I have to admit. Tayuya raised an eyebrow in her direction as she hefted Naruto up under her arm. Don't be getting any ideas, Twinkles. He's mine, I found him first. Gurren just laughed faintly and raised a placating hand as the odd group moved further into the country. She joked, but a part of her was actually a little sorry that Naruto was taken. He was a remarkable person and Gurren didn't hand out compliments like that to anybody. Mr. Zetsu. Zetsu watched impassively as Toby continued to make a fool out of himself as he was tossed around the large cove by the highly angered Sanbi. The half-plant man didn't understand why the man wouldn't simply use his abilities and end this already instead of acting the idiot and prolonging this. The black half finally grew too impatient. He had other assignments besides babysitting a fool that wouldn't act his own age or ability. The formed grass nin plunged his hands into the ground at the edge of the coast, spreading out his chakra as a massive system of large roots burst upwards from his position. With more chakra he forced them across the lake until they formed a net that Toby, and then the Sanbi promptly found themselves caught in. A few minutes later and Zetsu had suitably subdued the massive turtle, his wood-style ninjutsu draining away the most potent of its demonic chakra. A soaked Toby climbed out of the water onto the creature's upturned belly, looking around himself in wonder. Did you see that, Mr. Zetsu? My jutsu totally got him. Now I'm sure to get into the akatsuki. Black Zetsu used the arm he controlled and firmly planted his face into it, really not wanting to deal with Toby's antics right now. He turned and started walking away from the coast, leaving a confused and slightly panicked Toby behind as he frantically waved his arms above his head. Mr. Zetsu, what about the Sanbi? We still have to get it back to the base. Zetsu didn't reply as he just continued to walk into the forest, leaving Toby to look around himself and scratch his head. Suddenly the beast beneath him roared out from under the water, nearly sending the masked figure toppling back into the ocean. Toby frantically shook his hands down at the creature's belly. Good Sanbi. Zetsu could only smirk as the panicked cry rang through the forest. Mr. Zetsu. Fu smiled as she looked down at Naruto's peacefully resting form. Like everybody else, she didn't believe that Naruto even had a limit. Then again, over 30 miles of water running was impressive. She stretched out her arms a bit, still a little sore from hours of flight and sitting on Naruto's back. She smirked as she looked down at Tayuya lying next to her boyfriend, not asleep but using him as a pillow until he regained his strength and woke up. A part of Fu wished she could have somebody like that. She knew her brother loved her, but it could never be in that way. While she would never call her life sheltered, especially before Naruto had found her, and she would never call him overbearing, she knew that Naruto was very protective of her. She wasn't resentful and knew it was out of concern, but it did have the side effect of keeping her from many things, boys her age for example. They always moved around too much for her to develop any meaningful relationships. She hoped that would all change when they got back to Suna, but now here they were, out on the road again. She was shocked out of her thoughts when she spotted Yukimaru over by a tree, staring into the crystallized flower of his. She looked behind her at Gurren getting comfortable against a tree and wondered why Yukimaru was so obsessed with the crystal. At first she thought it was because it was his only connection to Gurren when she wasn't there, but she was right across the clearing from him. Everything about the boy was a mystery to her, his shy but warm personality, his past, his strange ability that made her feel an unrivaled calm. She walked over, completely unnoticed as the boy was absorbed in the reflections in his crystal. Fu wondered if there was any significance in the camellia, but from the way Yukimaru couldn't tear his eyes away from it, she knew there had to be. Hi. The boy's head darted up, shocked at getting sneaked up on despite Fu making no attempt to do so. Hi. Fu smiled and sat down next to him, leaning against the same tree as she studied the crystal. So what's with you and that crystal? I know Gurren gave it to you, but there must be a story behind it. Yukimaru gulped and stared at the frozen flower before his gaze darted to Gurren and finally back to Fu. I like camellias, red or white. Instead of petals, the entire flower drops from the tree and you can make ink from the tree itself. Fu nodded along. It was actually quite interesting despite her knowing practically nothing about flowers. Yukimaru's eyes suddenly brightened as he looked around, settling on something further away from the camp. I can show you something if that's okay. Fu just nodded, now intrigued by what the boy was offering. They picked themselves up and Yukimaru led her away from the clearing while his eyes darted around as if he was looking for something. Finally he smiled warmly as he picked up a leaf, nodding at it as if he was appraising it. He fiddled with it for a while before motioning for Fu to come closer. She did so and he smiled at her, a warm expression that made Fu's heart flutter a bit. My mother showed me this before she. He looked away sadly, and for some reason Fu hated to see him like that, already moving a hand to place it on his shoulder comfortingly. He perked up a little before bringing her over to a nearby tree, leaning against it as he placed the leaf against his mouth. Fu watched and listened in amazement as he proceeded to whistle through the leaf as if it were a flute. The music he made was beautiful, sad and heart-wrenching, but beautiful. She was captivated by it, unable to tear her eyes away from him even as he lost himself to the sadness in the song. It bore his pain, the loneliness from his life without his mother. It picked up at parts as he remembered Gurren and all she had done for him, but the somber overtones remained. When he finally finished and set the leaf down to one side, he looked across only to see a single tear running down Fu's caramel cheek. Fu, are you okay? He wasn't allowed to finish as the mint-haired girl leant across and captured him in a tight, comforting hug, new tears coming to replace the ones she had already wept. She parted from him, leaving him a little dazed and left with the scent of her hair in his nose as she wiped the tears from her eyes and cheeks. That was beautiful. Where did you learn it? Yukimaru suddenly seemed rather uncomfortable as he glanced between Fu and the discarded leaf on the ground. I didn't, I just sort of make it up. Fu blinked a few times, not quite willing to believe that the music she had heard was anything but rehearsed. He looked down again at the leaf before looking back up at her, red now tinging his features. Fu, can I ask you something? She nodded, not quite sure why she suddenly felt her heart rush, and unconsciously leaned closer to Yukimaru. Can I see your wings? Fu blinked a few times, frozen in place as her mind did a complete 180. Yeah, I guess. She stood up and allowed her wings to unfurl, stretching a bit to relieve the discomfort that built up when she kept them suppressed for too long. They still ached a bit from all the flying she had to do across the sea. Even the rests on Naruto's back didn't do much good. Yukimaru just stared at them with wonder, making Fu feel just a little self-conscious as she curled in on herself just a little. The young boy stood up and walked over, gaze still fixed on the semi-transparent set of wings that branched out to either side of Fu like a dragonfly. Recently she had been able to use 4 of them, but having to take a leap up from 2 by skipping the third, tail, was difficult. It was only a partial transformation, so there was none of Chomai's actual chakra involved, just a manifestation of her own, much like a transformation jutsu but more solid. Yukimaru traced a hand across the surface of the wing, following a light vein as it wound its way through the paper-like surface hypnotically. Fu let out a little giggle at the soft touches, surprised when she found it tickle her. Naruto never teased her for her wings, in fact he loved them, but he had never touched them like this, and Fu found her heart beating a little faster. She wasn't sure what to make of all these strange sensations as Yukimaru continued to stroke her wings in an almost trance-like state. They're incredible. Fu blushed from the praise, not sure how to take somebody being so entranced by her wings. Thanks. Yukimaru emerged from her other side, smiling warmly. It must be incredible to be able to fly free like a bird, floating on the wind like an errant petal, astray from its tree. Fu blinked at the poetic way the boy described it, finding herself lost in his bottomless magenta eyes. His warm, innocent smile captivated her, and again she found herself unconsciously drifting closer towards him. Fu almost couldn't stop herself as her lips drifted closer to his, Yukimaru only noticing what was happening right before Fu. Hey, did I hear someone playing a flute over here? Fu jerked back, nearly tripping over her own feet as she tried to put distance between herself and Yukimaru before Tayuya emerged from the trees. The older girl took in the scene with a trained eye, noticing the matching blushes adorning the two younger teens' faces. She also saw the way neither were meeting her in the eye, or each other for that matter. A very mischievous smirk found its way onto Tayuya's lips. Oh, I didn't mean to interrupt you too. Fu's head shot around, her blush's intensity instantly doubled. It's not like that, why don't you just mind your own damn business? Without another word her wings flapped powerfully and she took off into the air using strong strokes of her wings to propel herself further away from the embarrassing scene. Tayuya just raised an eyebrow, not quite expecting such a powerful reaction from the girl before turning to Yukimaru, who now seemed a little lost. Don't worry kid, she'll come around. Yukimaru blinked a few times before shyly letting his head droop to the floor. Tayuya actually found the scene a little adorable, seeing what Fu saw in the kid. Then, Tayuya just lightly patted him on the back with a half smile, half smirk. I was kidding kid, don't worry about it. Yukimaru looked up with a weak smile. Now, did I or did I not hear someone playing a flute, or am I going crazy from being near Naruto too long? Yukimaru's smile gained a bit of confidence as he rushed back over to where he had discarded the leaf, showing it to Tayuya, who found the makeshift instrument interesting. Budding musician A. No wonder Fu likes you. Yukimaru blushed again but tried to gain some confidence back by playing a short melody on the leaf flute. It wasn't as long, or as somber as the one he played to Fu, it contained more of a nostalgic feel. It had an equal impact on Tayuya though. She didn't cry, but she still found the music he produced to be powerful and moving. It really came from the heart. She pulled out her spare flute from the red pouch on her belt, looking it over with a scrutinizing eye before offering it to Yukimaru. The boy just looked at it tentatively before taking it, staring at T like it was made of gold. Tayuya gave him a rare heartfelt smile before walking back to camp with him. Don't worry Yukimaru, you and I are going to get along just fine. Not much was said as the group trudged across the open fields of the land of hot water that stretched on in a similar manner to the deserts surrounding Suna. Occasionally an outcropping of rock would just up from the otherwise barren landscape, breaking apart the horizon to stop travelers from going insane. Naruto wasn't sure how they were supposed to find one of Orochimaru's bases all the way out here in the middle of nowhere, but he followed Gurren anyway. There was a slight tension amongst the group. Fu and Yukimaru seemed to be trying to walk as far apart from one another as physically possible. Tayuya on the other hand was throwing amused and knowing looks between the two, smirking every now and again from Naruto's side. He had noticed that Yukimaru now carried one of Tayuya's flutes and was a little happy that she was opening up to somebody else. He was also glad she had a fellow musician to talk to now. Once she had tried to get him to take up an instrument, but his attention hadn't been in it. Gurren raised a hand as they came across a rather large group of 3 boulders that towered up above them. Her eyes narrowed in concentration as she tried to remember exactly what the entrance looked like the last time she had been there. Finally she nodded with a small smile, turning back to the group as she pointed to the boulders. We're here, this is Orochimaru's base. That will be it for this video. If you want more, comment down below, like, subscribe. And see you guys later.